The woman standing in my driveway thought she owned the place. She didn't. What she did own, though she had no clue yet, was a $100,000 legal bill, a criminal case waiting to explode, and a community about to watch her fall from the throne she built out of lies. Her name was Lorraine Ashford, president of the Sunset Hills HOA for 15 years. And the crazy part, every house in her precious kingdom sat on my land. She just didn't know her reign was about to end. I never planned to get into a war with an HOA. I didn't even plan on owning land. But life doesn't ask for your permission before it flips itself upside down. Mine flipped the day I got a call saying my Aunt Margaret, someone I barely knew, had passed and left me 1,500 acres in Millbrook. At first I honestly thought the lawyer dialed the wrong number. I was living in a cramped apartment working long hours as an environmental consultant, barely able to save anything. And suddenly I owned more land than some towns. It felt like a prank. But the deed was real. The paperwork was real. And a week later I was driving down a winding country road toward a property I'd never seen, trying to understand how my life had just broken into a completely different direction. I figured maybe I'd walk the land, maybe I'd lease part of it, maybe I'd sell a section if the taxes were too high. I had no idea that the moment I turned onto that private road, I was stepping straight onto a battlefield. The land was beautiful, exactly the kind of place Margaret would have worshipped. Forests, meadows, a clear running stream, and then the signs, literal signs. Private property, Sunset Hills, HOA, no trespassing, planted right in the middle of what the deed said was my property. It was like walking into your own house and seeing someone else's name on the mailbox. I got out of the truck, walked the boundary markers, and that's when an elderly couple, Howard and Constance, approached me like they'd rehearsed this moment. Kind eyes, nervous voices, warnings whispered like they were afraid of being heard. "Be careful with the HOA," Howard said. "They don't like outsiders." Outsiders. Funny word considering I owned the ground they were standing on. They told me to visit an older resident, Dorothy Miller. And when I did, she laid out dozens of HOA fine letters on her kitchen table, her hands trembling as she explained how she'd been fined $50,000 for ridiculous violations: grass height, mailbox color, planting roses instead of shrubs. She'd lived there 40 years. She'd built that home with her late husband. And now an HOA formed decades after she moved in was threatening to take it away from her. I promised I'd look into it. Truthfully, I didn't know what I meant by that. I just knew something was wrong. And then Lorraine arrived. A white Range Rover slammed to a stop inches from me like she was auditioning for a villain role. Mid-40s, expensive jewelry, perfect hair, and a tone that suggested she'd never in her life been told no. "What are you doing on our property?" she demanded. I told her my name, told her I'd inherited the land, told her I was conducting a survey. Her face went red, then purple. "This land belongs to Sunset Hills HOA," she said like reciting scripture. I showed her the deed. She glanced at it for half a second before waving it off. "Obviously incorrect. Remove your survey stakes or we'll take legal action." It wasn't her words that stuck with me. It was the fearlessness in them, the certainty, as if she genuinely believed the world bent around her. But I let her drive off, for the moment. That night in Margaret's old cabin, I dug through the inheritance documents again. And that's when I found it a 99-year lease from 1955, granting a developer permission to use 750 acres of Margaret's land. It was set to expire decades from now. But it also included a termination clause requiring only 60 days' notice if the developer breached the contract. And there it was, the thread. I just had to pull. The next day at the library, I learned Margaret had spent decades fighting developers and the HOA expansion. She'd battled commissioners, filed complaints, wrote editorials warning exactly about what Sunset Hills had become. She wasn't eccentric. She was a soldier no one listened to. Theodore, a retired lawyer who worked with her, filled me in on the rest. When Lorraine became HOA president, fines skyrocketed. Families were ruined. Vulnerable residents were targeted on purpose. Theodore spoke like a man who'd seen the monster up close and was relieved someone else was finally seeing it too. I asked myself why I was doing this, why I cared, why I felt this growing fire in my chest. Honestly, I wasn't sure yet, but I knew I couldn't walk away. Meeting Simone, the real estate attorney, Theodore recommended turned everything. She studied the lease-pulled records from the business registry and finally looked at me with a predatory smile. Dashel, Lorraine has been running a commercial business on your land. A big one. The HOA's management company. Not only illegal under the lease, it was Lorraine's personal cash fountain. She'd taken in $1.8 million in 5 years. That night alone in the cabin, I felt the first real wave of doubt. The kind that sits heavy on your lungs and makes you question whether you're the problem. Who was I to come in and disrupt a whole community? Did I really want to be the guy who forced people out of homes? What if I was making a huge mistake? I sat in that silence for a long time, long enough to replay Dorothy's trembling voice, long enough to remember Howard's warning, long enough to realize every person I'd met was living under fear. Somebody had to do something, and like it or not, that someone was me. So I hired professional surveyors, and exactly as I suspected, the results were devastating for the HOA. Most of their houses on the leased land, 7 more. Not on HOA land at all. The community center they rented out for weddings at $2,000 a day, right on my property. Environmental violations everywhere. The evidence wasn't a smoking gun, it was a wildfire. When the survey team started placing markers, Lorraine pulled up again like a raging storm. She called the police, tried to block the workers, screamed at everyone. But the officer read my deed, nodded, and told her to step aside. The look she gave me, if hatred were physical, I'd have been crushed. But the worst was still coming. 2 nights later, I woke to the smell of smoke. Flames licking up the side of the cabin, gasoline poured in a deliberate trail toward the gas line. If I'd woken up a minute later, I wouldn't be telling this story. That was the moment everything changed. This wasn't a property dispute anymore, it was survival. Simone filed lawsuits, injunctions, breach notices. News outlets picked it up. Suddenly, Lorraine's empire was under a spotlight she couldn't control. And once discovery began, every rotten secret she'd buried began clawing its way into daylight. Shell companies, fake salaries, hidden transfers, an email planning to steal my land outright, and worst of all, coordinated targeting of residents she didn't like. Then came the HOA meeting the night everything cracked. I walked into the community center carrying evidence and the legal breach notice. Lorraine smirked like she was waiting for applause. I connected my laptop to the projector, took a breath, and flipped the screen. The room gasped. Red boundary lines, survey photos, lease violations highlighted in neon, financial records proving Lorraine paid herself nearly $500,000. Phones lifted. People whispered. Some cried. Lorraine snapped. She accused me of forging documents, bribing officials, plotting a land grab. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. The truth was louder than both of us. Then, as expected, the retaliation hit like a truck. $100,000 in bogus fines, harassing phone calls, social media posts calling me a con artist. I hit my breaking point, sat alone in the darkness of Margaret's cabin and felt myself collapse inward. Maybe they were right. Maybe I should just walk away. Maybe peace was worth more than justice. And then, I remembered the fire, the smoke, the crackle of burning wood. Someone tried to kill me. And for what? Because I told the truth. No, that was the line. I got up the next morning and chose war. The hearing that followed was the closest thing I've ever seen to watching a kingdom crumble in real time. Residents packed the room. Reporters lined the walls. The judge opened the session and Simone laid out the truth piece by piece. Illegal rentals, environmental damage, fake management fees, emails discussing a $15 million land theft. Lorraine's face drained of color with every slide. When Dorothy took the stand, the room fell silent. Her voice was small but steady as she described the fear, the humiliation, the years stolen from her life. You could physically feel the shift in the crowd. Lorraine wasn't a leader, they finally saw her for what she was. And then, Lorraine cracked. She stood shouting, trembling, trying to justify everything, her fines, her lies, her greed. And then she said it. She deserved the money. She'd earned it. The land should have been hers. Her own confession in front of a judge, a packed room and rolling cameras. When the judge announced the ruling, the room held its breath. The lease terminated, effective immediately. All fines void, all liens dissolved. HOA ordered to dissolve within 90 days, and Lorraine barred from ever holding any HOA position again and referred to the district attorney for criminal charges. Her reign ended right there at the table where she once ruled like a queen. The criminal investigation moved fast. Indictments came. Plea deals were offered. Lorraine pled guilty to embezzlement and wire fraud. And when the judge finally sentenced her 3 years in federal prison, 5 years probation, $400,000 restitution, she broke down completely. Not the angry, defiant Lorraine I'd known, just a small, shaking figure with nothing left to hide behind. And that's where my story ends at the moment. The tyrant finally falls, the moment the community she terrorized finally breathes again, the moment truth outweighs fear. Because in the end, walls built on power will always crumble. But truth stands.